Welcome back to Football Unspoken. So, Josh, today for you, my friend, I have a Premier League conversation. Before we jump into it, I've got the trivia question for today. So, for today, can you tell me what was the smallest gap between first position and the relegation zone in Premier League history? Can you take a guess for me?
Logically, I think it'd be probably about 25 points.
It's a good guess, but no. It was about let me double check exactly how much it was. It was 35 points
Okay.
between Manchester United and Sunderland, and this was back in 96-97. So, launching off of that, Josh, can you tell me, do you think that the Premier League right now is more competitive than it's ever been?
Yes, I do. It's weird. The problem is at the bottom of the Premier League is the championship has got further away. But what that means is the 17 clubs that seem to just stay every single season have got stronger every year because they can now rely pretty much on getting that Premier League money year on year out. So even a team like a Wolves, they've transformed quite a lot. When they first came in, they were trying to be clever and do this whole Portuguese project where they brought in all these younger Portuguese players and they built a squad around that, and that kept them in the Premier League. But you look at the Wolves team now, it's a very different team, compared to what they had when they were doing that Portuguese project. And the same can be said about Nottingham Forest. You look at what they're doing this year, Brighton, what they've been able to do, Bournemouth. So there's a lot of evidence throughout the Premier League now of, I think if I was talking about the Premier League 10, 15 years ago, did Sunderland, when they were in the Premier League, have what you call a star player by Premier League standards? They'd obviously have their talisman of like Darren Bent or someone. There wasn't really a Premier League star. No one was naming him. Where if I look at Bournemouth now, they've got Clivert, for example. You're like, oh, that's a player, for example. So there's just a lot more star players sprinkled, I'd say, not evenly, but every team has a star player now that you could name pretty easily, where that wasn't the case 10, 15 years ago.
But what about Lee Catamol? Lee Catamol's a star player. Gotta get that boy in. No, I think that's fair. I think I'm not convinced, to be entirely honest. I think that there's a bit of an illusion around how competitive it can be, because there is a situation where, don't get me wrong, that a lot of teams can beat a lot of other ones, but at the same time, a 30-point gap between first and relegation is quite a close, because then everyone else falls into that 30 points, whereas you're looking at what with Liverpool and Man City, we're pushing 100 points for 3 seasons with each other. And to push 100 points, I mean, what, you're winning 30 of your games? Realistically, like that's kind of what you're looking at. So you're beating every other team pretty consistently at that point. And I do think that there's also a situation where maybe also the breaking up of the big six has made a big difference. But I can't remember the last time where we had a proper relegation battle. I mean, we've had a couple of ones where it's gone to the last day because of goal difference and that kind of stuff, or it's gone the last day on points, but because of goal difference, it'd have to overturn like a 15 goal difference, and you get then end of the last day thinking, well, champion's already been done, relegation's already been done. Maybe the mid-table battle is where it's competitive, but I still don't think that overall you're looking at the same kind of competition you had back when you had Man United, Arsenal, Chelsea pushing each other every year.
The three teams that came up last year just got relegated, and it wasn't even close by the last couple of match days. So that is a huge alarm in terms of the competitiveness of the league. What you were saying about the mid-table becoming more competitive, that's kind of what I was saying. Is all of those teams, maybe 17th is a stretch, but even say 15th, all the way up, is a very competitive team. You look at Fulham; they've got some really good players over there, and I could say that probably as I went down the table for everyone. The one difference, I would say, you made that point around Liverpool and Man City for a couple of years in a row, we're getting near 100 points. Those days are over to a degree, or we're not seeing that at the moment, and which I'm grateful for. But something that used to be a case of the old Manchester United team, particularly that Ronaldo, Rooney, Tevez, that kind of team, the opposition would just roll over for that Manchester United team. The reason was because everyone just thought they were going to get beat before they even came out the tunnel. bar maybe Liverpool this season, we don't have that in the Premier League. And with Man City dropping away, it's actually opened the league up a lot more, not just because it's Manchester City, but not having a team that when they're in the tunnel, the opposition just rolls over for them. Say for Ipswich today, you're getting hammered by Liverpool at time of recording, which is really annoying. But excluding that, there's no teams just getting rolled over in the Premier League anymore. So where I felt like 10, 15 years ago, which would have been, if you go 15 seasons ago, that's 2010. That's around where Man U were rolling over teams and Man City were coming up at that time. The only part I will agree with you on is we don't have real title races anymore like we used to, in terms of we haven't had a good year where we had, if we recall, we had the top four when it was Arsenal, Chelsea, Liverpool, Man U, and it felt like the four of them were in contention for the title probably right up until about now, until January, February. Then Arsenal would do their usual thing and bomb, and then one of the others would only really bomb around March or something, and then you'd have the final two for April, May. But we've known that it's pretty much a one horse race for Liverpool since like October. And that really has been the case for the last few Premier League seasons. Where even when Arsenal, you say Arsenal had a title race with Man City, there was just this kind of underlying knowledge that we all had as football fans, but you just knew Man City were going to win anyway. It was the same when Liverpool were up against Man City for years. You just knew Man City were going to win in the end anyway. And I will agree with you, when you talk about a Premier League that's competitive, you're talking about a 3+ team title race up until, let's say, April. You're talking about a relegation battle up until the last match day. And you're talking about a nice mid-table bunch of surprises coming in there, like a Fulham or something breaking into a European place. And at the moment, we've only got the third of those three options.
I would say Man City and Arsenal and Man City and Liverpool had some exciting title races, don't get me wrong. But the last time where I genuinely, as a neutral fan of the team who realistically are going to be winning the Premier League anytime soon, as a neutral fan, the last time I remember being really excited about a Premier League title race was when Leicester won it, which we're now looking about 10 years ago, and that was the last time where I was like, I genuinely don't know who can win this. You've got Tottenham, you've got Leicester. At one point, you had Arsenal around that situation as well. And because Leicester were the ones leading, you're sitting there going like, "Oh, this is edge of your seat stuff." Whereas at the moment, it feels like your edge of your seat stuff is happening around third to seventh. Where you got Chelsea, Man City, Newcastle, Brentford, not Brentford, sorry, Bournemouth, Brighton, all kind of in and around that area, looking to break into the top four. And that's where a lot of the stories are and what a lot of the news are, because, yeah, Liverpool feel like they've already won it. It's just a bit like, it is what it is. Now let's focus on the next battle. So I think in my head, it's one of those where, don't get me wrong, the Premier League feels more competitive in the fact that I agree with your point in no one's rolling over for anyone nowadays. You're not often seeing, even Liverpool at Anfield and Man City at Etihad, you're seeing teams like Bournemouth, Brighton, Brentford. Why are they all Bs? What's going on? That just stuck in a B situation, man. But like they will go to those places and they don't roll over, and often they can nip like an exciting draw. I'm not talking about like a 0-0. They've not done anything. You're looking at 2-2s, 3-3s that are really interesting and exciting. From that perspective, I do agree with you, but I just think that it feels like something's lacking in the Premier League's competitiveness, and I think that is the title race in the relegation zone. And it feels like what's happening nowadays is you're almost having a bit of a break off between your top 10, maybe 12, and then your bottom 10 to 8.
I remember Arsenal playing Leicester on Valentine's Day because it was 14th of February. And I had been, what's the word? No, I had been dumped on Valentine's Day, but I had a Valentine's date which had like exploded on the day, and I was really bleak. And then the Arsenal game against Leicester, which was the title game, it was seen as the title game, happened. And Danny Welbeck got the winner in like the 94th minute, which I was so excited by. It kind of made the whole day better. So I will always remember the Leicester title race just because of that. So thanks Leicester and thanks Arsenal. They came clutch in a moment I needed them in my life. But I think that does kind of tell the story. That moment tells a story of what you were saying about we don't have title races like that anymore, where you have these big moments. And part of that might be to do with this systemization of the Premier League. It's pepification. We've spoken about in previous episodes of how the Premier League just become very systemized like that, and you don't get as many rogue results as maybe you used to. And that's why you were saying that you do have this top six and then a 10-point gap, and then this next six and then a 10-point gap, and then the rest of the league. And I think that's probably why, is because whenever there is a gap of maybe ability, those teams consolidate that difference, like control the match better than they used to, which is a good and a bad thing as a neutral spectator. And one last thing, which is there's one team in the Premier League. This should be a separate podcast. Maybe we'll do one, but there's one team in the Premier League who is an outcast in terms of the way that they're approaching it, but you're seeing the good and the bad of it, and that's Tottenham. They're playing attacking football, and everyone's really excited about it when they're winning. But at the moment, they're losing a lot more than they're winning, and now people are getting angry because they're like, "Oh, no one likes losing." But I'm just saying they're kind of the outcasts in the Premier League, where they're not systemizing like their performances as much. It's not as consistent. It's very up and down. Where the rest of the Premier League is actually very consistent across all performances.
Yeah, that is an interesting one, and I'd like to see Ange Postecoglou get more time just because of their injury crisis. So we'll talk about that on a different podcast, I reckon, because that'll be quite interesting. But yeah, I think I do agree with all the kind of points you've made there. I think it probably has to do with the systemization and the pepification of the Premier League. But to round us out, I'm gonna ask you one more time. Do you reckon that the Premier League at the moment is more competitive than it's ever been, or less?
I still think it's more competitive because I still think the lower teams have a different level of quality in terms of individuals than they had before. It's maybe not as exciting as it was before, but I do think every team is more competitive now than they were before.
Very interesting. I really enjoyed this discussion. I don't think either one of us has won each other over, but we agree with certain points because I do think that there's more star players in individual teams now than there were 10, 15 years ago. But we'd love to hear what you guys think as well. Do you think the Premier League is more competitive now, or do you think it was more competitive and entertaining back in the day? Let us know your thoughts below. And until next time, this has been Football Unspoken. Cheers.